What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
They always told me I was the sensitive one. You feel too much, Mom used to say, usually right after I tried to explain that something didn't feel fair, or right, or okay. It wasn't a compliment, more like a diagnosis, something between a nuisance and a flaw. I grew up thinking I was just wired wrong, that maybe my brain really was built to misfire at the smallest sign of tension. I spent years trying to recalibrate myself, to toughen up, to learn how to swallow the hard stuff without showing it on my face. And I thought I was getting better at it, until one afternoon, last year, when I found myself sitting in a freezing therapist's office, hands shaking in my lap, saying the words out loud for the first time. I don't think I ever really mattered to them. That was the start of it. Or maybe it was just the moment I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I'd been seeing a therapist once a week for 3 months at that point. Nothing fancy. A woman named Ellen, whose office had these fake plants and soft jazz playing so low it was like white noise. I wasn't there to dig through repressed memories or figure out what went wrong in my childhood. I just wanted to stop crying in grocery store parking lots. I wanted to breathe without feeling like my ribs were made of glass. The anxiety had gotten worse after I turned 35, and I was waking up with this bone-deep dread every morning, like my body knew something terrible was coming even if my mind had no idea what it was. At first, my parents seemed supportive. Or at least curious in that weird, detached way they get. I remember telling them over dinner, and my mom just smiled that tight, controlled smile and said, "Well, that's good. It's good to talk to someone." My dad didn't say much, he just nodded and passed me the salt. I wasn't expecting hugs or tears or revelations. But I guess, deep down, I thought they might ask why. I thought they might care enough to say, "What's been going on?" But no, they didn't want the mess. They never did. When I lost my job 4 months later, a freelance gig I'd been juggling for almost a year that dried up overnight, I called my mom and told her I wasn't sure how I was going to keep paying for therapy. I said it plainly, not fishing for anything, just laying it out. I'm trying not to go backward, but it's hard without income. She paused, let out one of those long sighs that sounds thoughtful until you realize it's just filler, and said, "Honey, we're kind of stretched right now. We've been helping your brother out, and, honestly, there's nothing left." Nothing left. I remember repeating those 2 words in my head like they were lyrics to some twisted lullaby. I wasn't asking for a down payment on a house. I wasn't asking for a vacation or a car or even cash. I was asking for help staying sane. I'd never leaned on them before. I put myself through school, I paid off my student loans, I covered every emergency room visit and dental bill and busted tire on my own dime. And when I finally reached a point where I had no more rope left, when I finally admitted I needed support, they told me there was nothing left. What they didn't say, what they didn't realize I already knew, was that they'd just taken out a line of credit on their home equity the month before. I wasn't snooping. I was at the house for dinner, and the paperwork was sitting on the desk in the office. It wasn't hidden. It was sitting right there in a manila envelope labeled refinance. I wasn't going to say anything. I figured maybe it was for the roof or the plumbing. Dad had mentioned a leak. But 3 weeks after the phone call with my mom, 3 weeks after she told me they had nothing left, I got a text from my brother Danny. "Check this out," with a picture of a gutted condo kitchen, drywall exposed, wires hanging out of the ceiling, and a caption that said, "Starting over." Danny's condo wasn't a dump. It wasn't falling apart. It wasn't even old. He bought it 4 years ago after he landed a job in tech sales, one of those 6-figure, bluff your way through jobs where no one really knows what anyone does. But he blew that up last winter after his second DUI in less than a year. The company let him go. He said it was mutual, but we all knew better. Still, no one blamed him. Danny was always charming like that. My parents called it a rough patch and said he was working through things. They flew him out to Arizona for a wellness retreat, paid for a sober coach, and when he said he needed a reset, they didn't blink. They didn't ask for a plan. They just started writing checks. Meanwhile, I was skipping meals to make sure I could cover Ellen's fee. She had a sliding scale, bless her, but even discounted it was still $85 a week. I remember standing in the pharmacy aisle at Target, looking at generic brand anxiety meds and wondering if I could afford both those and gas that week. I went with gas. The panic attacks could wait. It wasn't just the money. It was the way they said it. The casual finality of "there's nothing left," like it wasn't a choice they'd made. Like I wasn't even in the equation. I started to realize something I should have seen years ago. When Danny messed up, they saw someone to rescue. When I broke down, they saw someone who'd failed. One of us was a problem they could fix. The other was a burden they couldn't carry. I didn't confront them right away. I wasn't ready. But that text from Danny, it lit something up in me. Not rage exactly. Something colder. Something sharper. I stared at that picture of the condo demo and felt this strange, eerie stillness in my chest, like the panic had receded just to make room for a new kind of clarity. They didn't help me because they didn't see me. They never really had. And I hadn't said a word yet. Not to them. Not to Danny. Not even to Ellen. But I was going to. And the words I had brewing? They weren't going to be nice. The first time I heard the word renovation, it was said with a soft, indulgent kind of reverence, the way some people say blessing or miracle, and it came from my father's mouth, almost like it carried some sacred weight, as though gutting and rebuilding a fully functional condo for a grown man in his late 30s was some kind of divine act, a holy intervention to wipe clean the sins of his past and give him a canvas for redemption. I remember I was sitting at their kitchen table, the same kitchen table where I used to do my homework while my mom clattered around making spaghetti and humming along to Fleetwood Mac. The same table where my brother once split open a grape soda and cried because he thought he'd ruined it forever, and my mom scooped him up and said, "It's just a mess, sweetheart, not the end of the world." That table, where so many messes were forgiven, now held a glossy binder full of flooring samples and paint swatches for Danny's new fresh start, and I remember looking at it, then at my father's face, then back again, and wondering if they even remembered what they'd said to me just a month ago. He said it like it was obvious, like anyone would do the same thing, like renovating Danny's entire condo was simply what parents do when their son gets drunk, loses his job, wrecks a car, and disappears for 2 months to find himself in Sedona, coming back with a tattoo of a lotus flower on his wrist and a new girlfriend named Becca who talked about energy fields and called my mom Linda like they were college roommates. It wasn't just the money, although that part still makes me feel like I swallowed a shard of glass every time I think about it. It was the way they framed it, as though this gesture, this enormous, expensive, generous gesture, was somehow part of his healing process. Part of their duty as parents to support their child in becoming his best self, a phrase my mom used with a completely straight face as she explained that the original granite countertops felt too cold and masculine and that Becca had suggested a warmer tone in the kitchen to promote emotional openness. I don't think I said a single word for the first 15 minutes. I sat there, blinking slowly, watching them flip through the binder like a couple shopping for their retirement cottage, nodding at each other, debating light fixtures like any of this was normal. And then I finally asked the question that had been beating inside my skull since I walked in. "Wait, so you're paying for all of this?" There was a pause, brief but unmistakable, before my dad answered, and in that pause, I saw the flicker of guilt, or maybe just the awareness that they hadn't prepared a good enough lie. "We're helping," he said, carefully, like each word was a stepping stone across a river he didn't want to fall into. "It's an investment in his future, really. He's turning things around. He needs a stable base." A stable base. I sat there, still trying to swallow that phrase, remembering how 2 months ago I told them I was barely sleeping, that I was terrified of sliding back into that dark place I used to live in during my 20s. When I couldn't get out of bed and had to keep a spoon in the freezer just to ice down the swelling under my eyes after crying all night. I had asked them for $200 to get me through the month, so I wouldn't have to pause therapy during one of the worst stretches of my adult life. And my mom's voice had been so soft, so rehearsed. "I wish we could help, sweetie, but with everything going on with your brother." She trailed off then, like she assumed I would just understand. Like Danny's chaos was a given, a priority we all should shoulder. So I asked another question. "How much are you putting into this?" Another pause. Another look between them, as if I was suddenly an outsider peering in on a family conversation I wasn't technically allowed to be part of. About 90,000, my father said finally, not even embarrassed. But it's not all at once. Some of it's deferred, and the contractor's giving us a good deal because he's a friend of mine. 90,000. They had nothing left for me, but they had $90,000 for a man who couldn't keep a job for longer than a year without blowing it up in flames and calling it a spiritual awakening. They had nothing left for me, but they had the time and energy to walk through showrooms and pick out appliances that matched his vibe. And maybe the worst part, the part that stuck like a splinter under my skin, was that none of this surprised me. I'd known since we were kids that Danny could do no wrong, that his mistakes were adventures, his tantrums were expressions of frustration, his bad grades were the result of a different kind of intelligence, while my straight A's were barely acknowledged. My awards met with a polite nod before the conversation shifted back to whatever minor drama Danny was navigating that week. I was the stable one, the quiet one, the responsible one, which, in our house, meant I was invisible unless something exploded. Still, I tried, God help me, I tried to keep the peace. I tried to ask questions without sounding bitter, to make observations without sounding accusatory, to figure out, gently, if they even heard how insane this all sounded. I asked, what happens when this doesn't fix things? When the new kitchen doesn't make him show up to work on time or stop drinking or actually take responsibility for anything? And my mom, sweet as pie, touched my arm and said, "Don't be so cynical, honey. He's really growing." I left the house that day with this strange, echoing hollowness in my chest, like someone had opened a trapdoor beneath my feet and I hadn't stopped falling yet. On the way home, I pulled over and sat in the car with the windows rolled down, not crying, not shaking, not even breathing hard, just sitting there, numb, staring at nothing. I don't remember how long I sat like that, but at some point, I took out my phone and pulled up my brother's Instagram page. There it was. A picture of him and Becca, standing in front of the stripped-down condo, arms around each other, smiling like they'd just won the lottery. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to tear it all down to build something beautiful. New beginnings. Grateful. Grateful." I stared at that word for what felt like hours, until the letters stopped looking like letters and turned into shapes. Until the meaning dissolved and all I was left with was the sound of blood in my ears and the overwhelming certainty that this family had never really seen me and maybe never would. It's strange, the way pain accumulates, not like a sudden collapse or an explosion you can point to and say, "That's when everything went wrong," but more like the steady drip of water wearing down stone, so gradual and relentless that one day, without warning, the foundation simply gives out beneath you, and you find yourself crumpled on the floor of a public restroom, heart jackhammering in your chest, struggling to breathe, while some fluorescent light above you hums like a warning bell you've been ignoring for years. That's exactly where I was, floor tiles cold against my knees, my fingers clawing at the fabric of my shirt like I could physically tear the panic out of my body, when I realized that no one was coming to save me, not my family, not my parents, and certainly not the version of myself I had spent so many years carefully curating just to survive their approval. The panic attack hit me at work, though calling it work at that point felt like a stretch. I'd picked up a part-time admin job through a temp agency after the freelance gig dried up, answering phones and managing calendars for a real estate office filled with people who seemed to have no awareness that other human beings might be crumbling right in front of them. That morning, I'd spilled coffee on the copier, accidentally double-booked a showing, and barely eaten anything except a granola bar from the bottom of my purse. The feeling started as it always did, with this faint pressure in my chest, like a hand pressing gently, almost lovingly, just to remind me who is in control. But it escalated quickly, the way it always does when you try to pretend it's not happening, and by the time I stumbled into the bathroom, I couldn't feel my hands. My vision had narrowed into this tight, suffocating tunnel, and I honestly thought, for a moment, that I was dying. When it was over, if you can call it over, when the aftershocks last for hours, I sat on the closed toilet lid, knees trembling, and stared at the back of the bathroom door like it might open and reveal someone who still remembered I existed. No one came. No one even knocked. I texted my supervisor that I wasn't feeling well and left without even grabbing my bag. I cried in my car, drove home in silence, curled up on my couch with a blanket pulled over my head like I used to do when I was little, and slept for 12 hours straight. The next morning, I called Ellen, my therapist, and asked if she could squeeze me in, even though I hadn't paid for the last session yet. She didn't hesitate. She just said, "Come in." That 45 minutes was the first time in weeks I felt like I was tethered to something real, something steady. I told her what happened, told her how I'd frozen up in the middle of the office, how the walls closed in on me, how I felt like I was disintegrating. She asked if I had any support system at home, anyone I could lean on. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was such an absurd question to ask someone who'd already been told, by her own mother, that there was nothing left to give. That afternoon, after the session, I did something I hadn't done in years. I asked for help again. I told myself it was practical, just an email, just a request for a small, short-term loan to help me keep going to therapy while I looked for better work. I kept it polite, even formal, like I was writing to a bank and not my own parents. I explained what had happened, how I'd lost the job, how the panic attacks were becoming unmanageable, how therapy was the only thing holding me together, and how I just needed enough to get through the next few weeks. My mother responded with a text. Not a call, not an email, just a text. 4 sentences. "I'm sorry you're struggling, sweetheart. But we just can't take on anything else right now. Danny's in the middle of getting things finalized with the contractor, and your dad and I have already committed financially. We hope things turn around soon." I read it over and over, each time slower, hoping the words would rearrange themselves, morph into something softer, kinder, more maternal, more human, but they never did. They stayed flat, impersonal, transactional. Like I was a distant acquaintance asking for a favor they didn't feel comfortable giving. There was no "we love you." No, "how can we support you emotionally?" No acknowledgement of what I'd gone through, just a polite no and the implication that Danny's backsplash was, somehow, more urgent than my unraveling. What made it worse, what still makes my stomach twist in knots when I think about it, was that I found out, later that same week, that they had co-signed a loan for Danny's new car. A brand new, fully loaded SUV, the kind with the heated seats and lane assist and a panoramic moonroof he'd probably never use because he's too busy texting while driving. I didn't even hear it from them. Becca mentioned it on Instagram, in a gushing post about how incredibly blessed they felt and how Danny's parents believed in second chances. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even cry, which might have scared me more than anything else, because it meant the hurt was no longer sharp, it had calcified into something heavier, something permanent. That night, I unplugged my phone, shut down my email, and for the first time in my entire life, I went fully silent. No calls. No updates. No explanations. I didn't tell them I was done, because I didn't know them that. I didn't warn them I was stepping back. I just disappeared. I erased myself from the narrative they had so carefully built, the one where I was the background character, the supporting role, the one who didn't need much, didn't cause trouble, didn't ask for too much space. They didn't even notice. At least not right away. But they would. Oh, they would. 3 months went by, maybe a little more, and during that stretch of time quiet, cold, almost weightless in its silence, I began to feel something I hadn't felt since I was a teenager sneaking out the back door to sit in my car with the engine off and the radio on low, a strange and unfamiliar kind of peace, not joyful or exuberant, but a stillness that made space for clarity. The kind of emotional quiet you don't realize you've been craving until it arrives like a hush after years of noise. It wasn't healing, not yet. I wasn't foolish enough to believe a few weeks of distance could undo a lifetime of disappointment, but it was something else, something like the first step out of a burning house. When you're barefoot and shaking, but finally breathing air that isn't smoke. I didn't reach out, didn't send updates, didn't ask how the renovation was going, didn't comment on any of Danny's endless social media posts, which had taken a nauseating turn into the world of faux humility and performative gratitude. As if every slab of quartz he posted a picture of was part of some sacred redemption story, the rise of a phoenix who conveniently never acknowledged the destruction he left behind. Becca, ever the cheerleader, had started posting side-by-side, before and after photos of the condo, captioned with quotes about resilience, transformation, and, my personal favorite, how love creates the foundation for new beginnings. I muted them both, not out of malice, but because I'd grown tired of choking on the sugar-slick facade they presented, the curated optimism that tried to sell failure as bravery and privilege as divine reward. And then, just as the weather turned and the leaves outside my apartment started to brown and curl in on themselves, my phone lit up with a familiar number, my mother's, and for the first time in a long time. I didn't feel the automatic flutter of guilt or obligation, only a cool detachment, like watching someone knock on a door you no longer live behind. I let it ring, and when the voicemail came through a minute later, I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, heart steady, and pressed play. Her voice was as it always was, sweet, practiced, measured, like every syllable had been iron smooth before it left her mouth. "Hi honey, just wanted to check in. We've been thinking about you, and we hope you're doing okay. Thanksgiving is coming up, and we'd really love for you to come. It's going to be a special one. Danny and Becca are hosting at the new place, and we're all so excited to see it finished. It would mean a lot to all of us if you were there. Let me know, okay? Love you." There was no mention of the months of silence. No acknowledgement of the things that had been said, or not said. No apology. No reference to the panic attack, the job loss, the desperate email I'd sent asking for help. Just a casual invitation, wrapped in sentimentality and served with a side of willful ignorance, as though I had simply taken a little vacation from the family, a brief hiatus, and now they were offering me the chance to re-enter the orbit, no questions asked, no apologies offered, no accountability required. And for a brief moment, just a breath, really, I considered it. I considered what it would feel like to show up, to pretend, to smile and hug and eat turkey in a room filled with people who hadn't earned my presence, who hadn't even noticed its absence until the holidays gave them an excuse to miss me. I pictured the table, the laughter, the toasts, Danny's smug grin as he showed off his new kitchen like a prize he'd won through sheer charisma, and my parents beaming with pride as if they had done something noble by rescuing him yet again. But then I remembered the cold of that office bathroom floor, the tightness in my chest, the slow suffocation of being invisible in plain sight, and I realized that going back, even for a day, even just for dinner, would be nothing more than another performance in a play I no longer wanted to act in. So instead, I wrote a different kind of RSVP. Not to them, at least not directly, but to the world. I pulled out my laptop that night, sat in my dimly lit kitchen with a mug of tea gone cold and a blanket around my shoulders, and I began to write. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth, from the beginning, the phone call where they said there was nothing left, the moment I saw the renovation binder on the kitchen table, the text from Danny with his fresh start, the voicemail from my mother that sounded more like a form letter than an invitation. I wrote it all down, and then I posted it anonymously, yes, but with enough raw honesty that anyone who read it could feel the weight of what it meant to be the forgotten child, the expendable one, the daughter who only existed to applaud someone else's redemption. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few people would read it. Maybe no one. But within 24 hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Within a week, it had gone viral. Messages poured in. From strangers. From people who'd lived the same life in different houses. People who had been sidelined, ignored, minimized in favor of a sibling whose chaos was rewarded with attention and resources and unconditional support. People who had broken quietly while their families celebrated someone else's mess, as if it were a journey worth funding. And somewhere in that wave of validation, terrifying and affirming and surreal, I felt a shift, not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. I wasn't broken. I wasn't too sensitive. I wasn't asking for too much. I was just asking to matter. 3 days after the post went viral, I received another voicemail from my mother. This one was different. The voice, still sweet, had a crack in it, a brittle edge of hurt pride. "I saw what you wrote," she said. I don't understand why you'd want to hurt us like that. That's not how we remember things. You're twisting everything, and it's cruel. How could you do this to your family? I played it twice, then a third time. And when I finally hit delete, I felt something dissolve inside me, some last sliver of obligation or shame, a final thread tying me to the idea that their version of the truth was more valid than my own lived experience. I didn't call her back. I didn't send a message. I didn't explain myself. Instead, I sat down at my laptop and began to write again. Because sometimes revenge doesn't look like shouting or slamming doors or dramatic confrontations. It looks like telling the truth so clearly and unapologetically that the people who tried to erase you can no longer pretend you were never there. There's a moment, subtle and almost imperceptible, that occurs sometime after you've removed yourself from the orbit of people who once claimed you as theirs, a moment when the silence you once feared begins to sound less like punishment and more like music. Like the absence of noise is not emptiness, but possibility. And for me, that moment arrived on a cold morning in late December, long after the last leaf had fallen from the tree outside my apartment window and the streets had taken on that post-holiday stillness, when the decorations are still up but the celebration has faded, and all that remains is the dull echo of what should have been joy. I had left the city by then. Quietly. Without telling anyone. I packed my life into the trunk of a rental car, clothes, a laptop, a few books, the folder of unpaid invoices that had once dictated my worth, and a single photo of myself as a child, standing in the snow in a red coat, smiling at someone behind the camera who, in that moment, I must have believed loved me without condition. I didn't leave a note. I didn't call. I didn't post anything. I just drove. For the first time in 36 years, I didn't feel obligated to stay in proximity to people who confused love with leverage, who used guilt like currency, who measured closeness in how well I could pretend. The drive took 2 days, cutting through the cracked spine of the Midwest and winding toward the coast, and by the time I arrived in the small, weathered town I'd chosen more for its anonymity than its charm, I felt like I had shed layers of myself I didn't even know I was carrying. I rented a modest studio above a used bookstore whose owner, an older woman named Margot with kind eyes and zero curiosity about my past, offered me part-time hours in exchange for shelving and managing their dusty, chaotic back room. A place where I could breathe without being seen. It was not glamorous. It was not impressive. But it was mine. In the weeks that followed, I began to write again. Not the viral post kind of writing, not the aching catharsis meant for strangers' eyes, but real writing, the kind that forces you to face your own voice and listen without flinching. Some of it was angry, sure, but most of it was just honest. I wrote about silence, about what it means to disappear and reappear somewhere no one is waiting. I wrote about memory, about how families are not built on love alone but on the small, daily choices to show up, to ask, to listen, to see. I wrote about how forgiveness isn't always noble, and how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to pretend you weren't wounded. Eventually, the emails started. First from my father, short and cautious, the kind of emails that look like they were typed slowly, with each word weighed and measured. He asked how I was, told me they missed me at Christmas, said the house felt off without me, like a tree missing its lights. He didn't mention the article, didn't mention the therapy, didn't acknowledge the reason I had vanished, only that they noticed I was gone. I didn't respond. A week later, another email arrived, this one a little warmer, with a joke about how Danny's fiancé had overcooked the ham and how he'd finally stopped pretending to like almond milk. Still, I said nothing. Then came the message from my mother. Unlike my father's awkward warmth, hers was laced with confusion and hurt, a tone she'd perfected over the years, soft and trembling, like she was always on the verge of tears, but never quite willing to spill them. She wrote that she didn't understand what I was doing, that family was supposed to be forever, that Danny missed me and didn't know what he had done wrong. She said I was punishing them, that I was rewriting history, and that all they ever tried to do was keep the family together. She ended it with, "You know where we are. You know you'll always be welcome. Welcome." As if I had simply wandered off for a while and now needed a door left open. I sat with that word for a long time, replaying it in my mind, rolling it over and over like a coin between my fingers. Welcome. As if their love was a room I had to knock before entering. As if belonging were something they offered, not something I was born deserving. I never replied. Instead, I went to the post office, bought a simple white envelope, and tucked inside a single sheet of paper, my most recent therapy bill, printed in black and white, the total circled with a ballpoint pen. Nothing else. No letter. No return address. No explanation. Just the bill. The cost of not being seen. The cost of holding your own hand through the darkest nights while someone else installs soft-closed drawers and marble countertops for a man who never once had to earn their affection. I never heard back. But I didn't need to. Some silences aren't empty, they're full of the things no one had the courage to say. And so now, months later, as I walk along the gray stretch of beach just beyond the bookstore, my coat zipped to the chin and my boots crunching through the salt-damp sand, I think about the questions people still ask me when they find out I haven't spoken to my parents since Thanksgiving. They always ask the same thing, always with a mix of disbelief and pity, like I've chosen exile over warmth, like I've refused to participate in something sacred, but do you ever go back for the holidays? And I always smile, gently, the way you do when someone speaks about a place they assume you still live. I tell them no. And when they ask why, I don't give them the whole story. I don't give them the emails or the voicemail, or the $90,000 condo, or the panic attack on the office floor, or the therapy bill in the envelope. I just say, because I finally stopped waiting for someone to notice I was drowning. And sometimes, if I'm feeling bold, I add, and because leaving didn't break me, it gave me back the pieces I was told to leave behind. The truth is, I don't go back because there's nothing there for me anymore. Not a table with a place set, not a voice that says, I see you, not a home that feels like safety. There's just a house where someone else's story gets told a little louder, a little shinier, a little more often than mine ever did. So no, I don't go home for the holidays. I go somewhere better. I go where I'm free.